All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you for listening on Talk America Radio or the Liberty Radio Network, iTunes, Stitcher, all of the rest. It's been a glorious week, a week of guests, and we're wrapping it up, I think, the right way, although we started it off quite well as well. Started off the week with Scott Horton from antiwar.com. Then we had Ian Freeman on from Free Talk Live, Daryl Perry from the New Hampshire Libertarian Party, Thomas DiLorenzo yesterday from the Mises Institute, and today I'm very pleased to have him on. This just turned out to be an awesome week for everyone involved. And I was just searching my brain, like, who can I try to get on? I have a couple more days to record these in advance. And then I thought it was just like a Hail Mary. I said, why don't I see, how do I get in contact with motherfucking Jeff Berwick? Let's see if I can get that guy on here. So I just filled out the contact form on the dollarvigilante.com. And I was surprised. He's just like, sure, I'll come on. That's the great thing about, libertarians and anarchists is that they're all so humble that they'll talk with anybody and they'll talk about anything. Nothing's off limits. So without further ado, Jeff Berwick from the Dollar Vigilante, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Good to be on with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And we're living in a very interesting time. And I'm constantly stuck in between two places where I want to be very hopeful about the future of liberty and all the great technological advances that are coming out, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, all of this stuff. It's like, yes, the state, we're seeing cracks in the structure. On the other hand, I feel like we have a long way to go and that it's not going to be a painless journey to get where we want to be. What are the biggest obstacles you see in the path of liberty today?
Well, first of all, I find it interesting that you're thinking exactly the same as me. I have days now, and this isn't normal. 10 years ago, I did not have many hopeful, positive, optimistic days about freedom. But in the last couple of years, and more, almost like weekly or monthly, it's just increasing. I'm seeing more and more signs of optimism that we can get through to a better place, a much, much better place than we have been for the last few decades or even centuries. If you look at the 20th century as the century of total war, as Ron Paul says, it also happened to be, and it's no coincidence, the century of total banking, as Ron Paul also pointed out. And we're getting rid of all those things slowly, actually fastly, quickly. So I'm in the same boat as you a little bit in that I'm a little conflicted on should I be really depressed or should I be really happy. It's like I got to have days where I have both. But more and more, I'm just getting more optimistic. I'm just seeing too many things happening now. I'm seeing too many people waking up. And I'm also going through a lot of personal things as well. And I kind of listen to things like be the change you want to see in the world. So I've been going through a lot of sort of transitions in my own personal life where I was, okay, we got to change the world. Well, I got to get out there and, make it happen and change it. And then I reached a point a couple of years ago where I became very depressed and very exhausted and all those sort of things. And I started listening more to the people who say, you don't have to change the world, you change yourself, and that changes the world. And I was like, that's pretty hippie sound. And that's, I'm sitting here in a business suit, I didn't listen to a lot of these hippies before. But it's actually true. And so I've actually gone through and changed myself personally dramatically in the last few years. And now I don't know if I'm changing the world, but I'm starting to see that happening in the world now. And I don't know if I'm affecting it or whatever, but I think if enough people do these things, it does have an effect. So yeah, we're at a very interesting time. Of course, I write the Dollar Vigilante, and we started that in 2010. And the whole point of it was, and the tagline is, surviving and prospering during and after the dollar collapse. And I said in 2010 it'll happen within this decade, and we're 2017 now, and I think we're still pretty much on track. Might be off by a year or two, but we're pretty darn close to it's going to happen this decade. And You just look at the dollar right now. You look at the U.S. government just passed $20 trillion in debt, and that's all lie accounting anyway. It's actually more than $100 or $200 trillion, which is about $250,000 for every person in the U.S., man, woman, and child. Every baby born has $250,000 it supposedly owns, if you believe in this magical criminal organization called government, that they're supposed to owe. Of course, that's criminal just to give a baby that kind of debt just to start off life, and very evil statism, of course. You look at the dollar too; it's begun to collapse now. I think just in the last few months, we're seeing the dollar's has had its worst year, and I'm actually just looking up the numbers, but it might be decades in the last year, and this is just the start, in our opinion. So we're seeing central banks kind of having problems all over the place. We're seeing all these governments are all bankrupt, and I think that's sort of on purpose. I think the bad, if you want to think about things in terms of good guy, bad guy, I think of good guys as the ones who believe in individual sovereignty, believe in the power to the people, allowing people to control their own lives and not controlling them. The bad guys are more the types who want to control it from the top down, the pyramid sort of a structure, the Illuminati, as you could say. If you look at the back of the $1 bill, it's no accident. There's a pyramid with an all-seeing eye on there. That's what they believe, and they want to control it all from the top, and they want to control everybody and control everything. It's very sort of, they say, I think some of them think they're doing it for the right reasons. They think if they don't do that, then it's just going to be hell on earth and everyone's just going to eat each other and kill each other. I don't believe so, and so we're kind of approaching it from two totally different angles. But their angle is totally falling apart, and our angle is totally rising dramatically right now, and that's why I say I'm positive. But we're going to definitely have to go through a massive transition. No matter what happens, before we get anywhere, it's either going to get a lot better or a lot worse fairly soon in the next couple of years, in my opinion. But it's going to be very messy in the meantime. And if you're not prepared for it, it could be quite dramatic or quite traumatic. It could even wipe you out completely. If you're not prepared, if you don't know what's going on. If you are prepared, you can actually prosper and actually even massively profit from it if you care about money. And I don't even care about money that much anymore. I'm going through that level of transition now. But you can, if you want, actually profit from it and not be too badly hurt during the transition. But you need to be aware of what's going on. So I don't know where you want to begin this conversation, but there's a lot of problems for sure. And how we get through those is going to be interesting.
Well, I say as long as we're starting on the negative end, were everything to get much worse in the near future, why would it get much worse? Are we talking about a complete collapse of the dollar? Are we talking about just the U.S. economy going into a formal recession? I mean, of course, it's never really come out of a recession since the 07-08 crisis, but would we go back into a recession? Hyperinflation? What are you seeing as far as troubling and painful times that could be near ahead?
Well, I should say before I begin that some of these things don't have to be troubling and painful as long as you're prepared for them, as I said. And a lot of Americans, in fact, can use a big slap in the head. They've lived off this U.S. dollar dominance now for 100 years. They've gotten used to getting everything for free. You can just see that all happening. And you're seeing so many on antidepressants and stuff like that. They really need a good shake. And who knows how they get that shake? And maybe it comes from the above or whatever you want to say. But it's actually a good thing. In many ways, a lot of these things are actually good things. People have forgotten the importance of certain things, and that's the importance of family, the importance of love, the importance of just enjoying the little things in life. They've gotten carried away with all the credit and all the debts and partying and all this kind of stuff. And I did as well, I have to admit. But I kind of woke up a couple of years ago, and now I kind of am changing. But as far as what we're headed for, we're absolutely, there's no doubt about it, it is baked in the cake, headed for a massive change, a massive shakeup. I've been talking about it since 2010. We have just, this system itself is on its last legs. There's just massive amounts of debt. And again, I think it was on purpose they did this. They want to bring in the New World Order with a one world government and a one world central bank and a one world currency through the collapse of all this. And they actually printed on the front cover of The Economist magazine, which is Rothschild-owned magazine, in 1988, that 2018 will bring in the New World currency. And that's very interesting. And they plan these things well ahead of time. For example, I try to expose Bilderberg almost every year lately, and they planned out the euro decades in advance. They plan these things decades in advance, and there's no reason to think they weren't planning a sort of a one world, new world currency 30 years ago in 1988. And if you look at the front cover of the magazine, it's a bunch of it's the dollar, it's the yen, it's them all burning, and then a phoenix rising from the ashes. They always put these very occult sort of meanings in. But we're going to see that. We look at the debt of the U.S. government. It's just absolutely, we just already mentioned it, $20 trillion. It's actually closer to $200 trillion. So that's over. It's just game over. As I mentioned, $250,000 for every person in the U.S. of debt and liabilities of the U.S. federal government. So if you have a family of 4, that's $1 million for every family. Look down your street if you're in the U.S. right now. Look at every house. $1 million. They all are supposed to pay that back. They obviously can't, especially with half the people in the U.S. today living paycheck to paycheck. It's absolute impossible. And this will not last forever, no matter what anyone says. This is just math. You can't have absolute insanity forever. At some point, the bill needs to be paid, and it'll be paid in one way or another. And so you look at things like Europe. Europe's is just as bad or even worse in many cases. So it's all bankrupt. We're in this. This is what happens when you have a debt-based financial system, which we've had since at least 1913 with the Federal Reserve, and now pretty much every country in the world has a central bank, and the only ones that don't are the ones that keep getting attacked. And it's no surprise, or it's no coincidence. Places like Iraq and places like Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, these were all places that were defying having a Rothschild-backed central bank, and look what happened to them. This is a very nefarious, very criminal, very evil, tyrannical terrorist organization that controls essentially much of the world. And so we have all these systems that are all absolutely bankrupt, and I think it's on purpose. So now it's just a matter of when is the carpet going to get pulled out from underneath us. And if you look back through a little bit of recent history, you can see that they tend to do this almost every 7 years, and that's something that I caught on to, something called the Shemitah, and they did it in 2001. The exact end day of the Shemitah, which is every 7 years, it's from the Bible or the Torah as well, that's every 7 years, there's sort of like a washing away sort of a event. And I don't know if it's supernatural. I don't know if the elites sort of, because they're very into the occult, they're very into numerology, they're very satanic, they're mostly all pedophiles as well. And this is all coming out now too. We're kind of going through this sort of revelation sort of a period right now. And the Christians talk about revelation. The hippies talk about it as a transition to the age of Aquarius. The other people talk about the Mayan calendar and those sort of things. These are all related, and we're going through this massive shift right now. And anyway, getting back to what I was talking about. So they had the crash in 2001. It was actually just after 9/11. The exact end day of the Shemitah was that big market crash. Then in 2008, the massive day of the market crash was the end day of the Shemitah that year. We didn't have the end day of the Shemitah have a crash in 2015, but this is actually the Jubilee, which we thought was maybe last year, but I actually think now it's this year. This gets kind of complicated. You have to go through all kinds of information to get to it. But my point is that it actually could be this month. It actually could be in the next few weeks this crash happens. Now, it might not be. It could be a few more months. It could be another year or two. It really can't go any longer than that. We're that far beyond. So we're going to have a massive crash. And you brought up recession earlier. It's not going to be a recession. It's going to be bigger than the Great Depression. The people will forget about the Great Depression after this, because that's how big this collapse is going to be.
Well, just to play devil's advocate for a sec, and I expect you to hit this out of the park. People were crying and saying, oh my gosh, $5 trillion, this is outrageous. And they said $10 trillion, this is outrageous. And now you and I are both on the same page and saying $20 trillion, and if you include unfunded liabilities, then we're talking $100 or $200 trillion. But aren't we just like the people of the past who were saying 5 trillion and 10 trillion were outrageous, and nothing really happened, nothing really changed? So why is there this big outrage now? Couldn't it just continue on until it's 25, 30, 50, and then 100 trillion, and then who knows what the unfunded liabilities would be at that point? But, I mean, folks like you and myself have been making this argument for a long time, and, you know, for most people, they're not seeing debt, national debt, as a real problem. They don't really care, and it doesn't seem to impact them in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, that most people won't see this or they don't know about this. They don't talk about this on CNBC. They don't teach it in the government indoctrination camps called schools. They don't even teach economics. They don't tell you what money is. They don't tell you how the money system works. But as far as your point about there's been some people, and I have my mentor, for example, Doug Casey, brought up that he thought the system could collapse in the 1970s. And really it actually almost did, but they actually salvaged it, and they actually went back to a more sound sort of a system for a period of time. But now it's gone too far. So we've essentially since 1980, going back, of course, you have to always start at the Federal Reserve in 1913. But essentially, the U.S. was bankrupt by 1971. That's why Richard Nixon had to take the dollar off the gold standard, because if they were to actually pay out the gold that was owed to everyone, the U.S. would be absolutely bankrupt. So they did that. And that was sort of like a clarion call to people like Doug Casey, who are like, okay, now we're into crazy land where you have a money that's not backed by anything. Then they went through the hyperinflation of the 70s. And a lot of people thought, okay, this is going to be the end of it. But it wasn't, because actually Paul Volcker, the Fed chairman at the time, actually rescinded a lot of the monetary inflation. He actually increased the interest rates, or allowed the interest rate to go to sort of like a more normal market level, which turned out to be about 18%. And that kind of reset the system. It was actually kind of a good thing in general, although the whole system's kind of bad in general. But for most people, it was a decent sort of a way to get through it. And now, ever since then, you've just seen governments stacking up debt unbelievably, because they were actually restricted by the gold standard in before 1971. Now they're not, and they just continue to pile it up. And I have to tell you, I started this in 2010. And things, I thought we still had probably 5 to 10 years. That's what I always told people. And I think we're still on track for that. When I first started, I was like, okay, it's pretty bad right now, but it's not terrible. It actually, if you really wanted to fix the system in 2010, you still had an option to do that, because there wasn't enough debt yet. But actually, since 2008, the U.S. government has doubled its national debt. So all the national debt that the U.S. government has done, ever since whoever the first president was — I don't pay attention to presidents. To me, they're totally all criminals, in my opinion. Okay, George Washington, whoever it was, whatever. And up until Barack Obama, Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Obama, who didn't have one day of peace his entire presidency, all of that debt, they doubled it since Barack Obama went in, and it has not slowed down, by the way. Actually, Trump, who a lot of libertarians — not a lot, but hopefully not a lot — but some libertarians thought, oh, he might be a decent president. He actually has made everything almost worse. They had the biggest monthly deficit ever. I think it was in June. I haven't looked at the numbers since then. I don't know if they've released those numbers yet, but there's nothing pulling it back. We've just crossed $20 trillion. There's been no cut of spending or anything at all. But it doesn't even actually matter at this point, because it's so bankrupt, the system. So $20 trillion, if you just do the math on that — and I went to government indoctrination camps like a lot of people, so I can't do it all in my head — but if you just say 10%, because we're at basically 0% interest rates, we're at like 0.75 or something right now. And even Europe's in negative, which is absolute Keynesian Kool-Aid drinking craziness. And the reason they're at that level is because if they allow the interest rate to rise even a few percent, everything's bankrupt. Everything goes under. And so they're kind of, I think, waiting for a certain moment for whatever reason, and then they're just going to yank the rug out of everything. But if they allowed the interest rate just to rise, and like I said, in the 1970s, they had to let it rise to 18% to kind of reset the system. If you allow it to rise to even 10%, with $20 trillion, and I can do that math in my head. I'm glad they taught me that much in the government prison camps for children. But that's $2 trillion per year, which is almost the entire tax extortion theft-based revenue of the U.S. government. So every single penny that they're stealing from people, and that is actual theft and extortion, would just go to pay interest to the Rothschilds at that point. So this game is over. We are so far beyond. There's absolutely no chance. I'll put my reputation, I'll put my name on this. There's no way we go 10 or 20 more years without something absolutely massive happening. It's just not possible. If you really understand the numbers, it is so far beyond done already. It's just a matter of, we're not talking years. Well, it could be years. It could be 1 or 2 more years. That's possible. But we're talking more likely months, weeks, or days at this point.
Oh, I hope it's not days, because I'm not even going to be in the country at that point, and I can.
That might be a good thing, actually.
Well, yeah, but if America goes down, I'm not going to want to come back, and I'm going to be stuck in Japan, living out of.
I'd rather be in Japan, actually.
Well, on that note, I mean, one of the favorite stories that you've told on a number of different videos is how you've traveled pretty much the entire world, at least to a lot of countries, a lot more than most people. And Americans tend to think of America as the freest country in the world, but you said America is probably the most authoritarian of the countries that you've been to. Do you still stand by that? And, you know, what can really be changed? Should people leave America? I know that you're Canadian, but you live in Mexico. Should Americans with your kind of mindset just get up and move to Mexico?
Well, it's not a bad idea. I'm not saying all 300 million people should. That would actually ruin Mexico, in my opinion. But you know, I've been to about 100 countries, and I travel a lot. And I actually don't say the U.S. is the most authoritarian, but it's right up there. I haven't been to North Korea, so I can't say what that's like. I have been to Cuba. That's pretty bad. I've been to Venezuela. That's pretty bad. But the U.S. is right around just after Cuba and Venezuela, in my opinion, as far as really oppressive sort of police state, you know, just the rules and regulations. This is supposed to be the land of the free. To me, it was a little bit shocking. I did grow up in Canada. I spent some time in the U.S., but I also traveled the world. And I watched the Hollywood propaganda a lot. I saw the news on the fake news on CNN and always talk about land of the free. And, you know, I became sort of aware to the importance of freedom around 2002 when Doug Casey told me that I was essentially an anarchist. And I was like, oh, I thought those people threw bombs or something. He's like, no, that's not what it is. And I started to become aware of it. And then I went to the U.S. after that. And I was like, this is not free at all. This is horrible. And I'd get like kidnapped all the time by people in blue costumes who'd put me in handcuffs and for just little things. I'd walk outside of a bar with a drink because I'm used to doing that in most other countries. And 3 squad cars would surround me, throw me up against the wall. And it's only when I started mentioning lawyers and that I have money that they started to back off and stuff like that. You know, don't get me wrong. Like I've spent a lot of time in the U.S. and you know, if you live in like a smaller town, and it can be pretty much very nice. Like it's not like everywhere is horrible or anything like that. But in general, as far as all the rules and regulations and taxes and the government involvement in virtually everything, it's one of the worst countries in the world by far. It's, you know, that's one of the reasons why I do enjoy spending a lot of time in Mexico. Is even today I was with my wife. We had to go to a meeting, and my driver was driving like a maniac. And I wanted to tell him to slow down, but I was, you know, I just didn't want to. You know, my wife seemed fine with it. I was like, man, he's driving way too fast. But I was like, just thinking, it's so funny without speed limits here, without cops. It's like you just do whatever you want. And I actually like that. I like the feeling that we don't have to watch over our shoulder when we don't stop at a stop sign and stuff like that. And you go to the U.S., it's just like that. And it's just getting worse and worse. And the taxes and the regulation. Because, of course, a true free place doesn't have any taxes. It doesn't have any regulations. That would be the definition of a free place. The U.S. has one of the highest tax rates in the world, both for corporate and for personal. It's also got by far the biggest enforcement arm of its extortion taxation scheme, the IRS, that, you know, literally, and the NSA. So they literally have the capability to track you and read everything you're doing and watch everything you do and make sure that you pay them every penny they say you owe them, even though you don't. It's just extortion. But you don't have that in other places. That's why I prefer almost any other country, because they just don't have that level of authoritarian tyranny overseeing everything. And to me, what's going to happen is as the U.S. dollar loses its reign of dominancy, which is already starting to happen, and it will go to zero through a hyperinflation at some point in the next few years. We're not talking decades. The U.S. will become, for a period of time, horrible. That's why I said if the collapse happens in the next couple of weeks and you're in Japan, you will be so lucky. And here's the reason why. Look at Japan during the tsunami. If the tsunami happened in New York or California, do you know the levels of chaos and looting and government martial law and craziness that would go on? In Japan, people were pretty calm. That's their culture. It's a cultural thing more than anything. They're just like, well, our whole town got washed away. I guess we're going to have to rebuild it. No one was screaming or anything. If you watch the videos, it's really quite amazing. And so if there's going to be a massive collapse, I would much rather be in Japan, because you just know people won't freak out. Whereas in the U.S., they're just not expecting this. They've been told their entire lives, this is the richest country in the world, when it's actually the most bankrupt country in the world now. This is the freest country in the world. It's one of the least free countries. And they're going to soon find out that how wrong they were and how they've been lied to. And it's going to come down really messily, as I said. But there is also, if we can get through that, the U.S. could be the greatest place in the world again if we can get through that and if we get enough people to understand that the reason it got there was because of governments and central banks. So let's not do that again. Let's try actually having a free country. And enough people in the U.S. actually understand things like entrepreneurialism, capitalism, things like that. They can rebuild within months if they're given the opportunity. But we just need to get that information out to people. So when the collapse happens, they know, okay, this is because of governments and central banks. We've got some gold, we've got some Bitcoin. Now let's rebuild, and we can have it. Or if people don't wake up to that, they're going to be out on the streets just going crazy. It's just, you see in the U.S. when they turn off the food stamps or the EBT machines or cards or whatever for even just a couple of hours, it's riots in some places. They're just not ready for this.
Yeah, that's a good example of how things could go down as we look at our giant welfare state in this country and we say, well, if we run out of money, it's not just that we don't have money for police and fire departments. It means we don't have money to give all the goodies out to all the people that feel like they just depend on them. So what happens when you're not getting your welfare check anymore, you're not getting your food stamps anymore? These people are going to go berserk. And because of, like you said, our lovely government indoctrination camps, they have horrible education, and that leads people generally to be more violent, and they're poor, and they have guns. And this could be just a chaotic situation. You know, right now we're supposed to be going into a bit of a commercial break, but my affiliates will just have to forgive me because this is too good to pass up. I'm not going to stop and make a pause or anything like that. But we are coming up on roughly the halfway point, so I want to steer things in a different, more hopeful direction, and perhaps start with, you said that you've kind of made some changes in your personal life. I remember watching videos of you from maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and in like all the videos when you're doing interviews, I swear, like the vast majority of the time you have a cigarette in your hand, and it's like you finish one, and then this person asks a question, and then you pick up another, and I'm just like, man, he's just like going through a whole pack in an hour. And from watching more of your recent videos, you've given up smoking. You've, by and large, greatly reduced your alcohol. I personally actually just quit drinking about a month ago now. And the changes are dramatic. You know, it's crazy. Like the physical changes and your emotional state and your mental state, everything is just different when you stop putting those toxins into your body. And so have you kind of experienced that kind of thing just by changing what you put into your body? Is that one way where people can kind of see hope in the future?
Oh, absolutely. That's been mind-blowing to me, the changes and how different I feel, as you pointed out. It all started for me with kind of reaching a level of depression, which I think the alcohol was not helping. I was drinking a lot. You could call me an alcoholic or not. I wasn't drinking like every day, and I wasn't getting up in the morning and drinking or anything like that, but I was drinking a lot, and it would be like quite a few nights of the week I'd open a bottle of wine and just start drinking it while I'm doing some work or whatever. And, you know, over years, and then, you know, as a sort of an anarchist who sees how much statism is in the world today and how unfree it is, it can get kind of depressing. And then on top of that, when you're kind of putting things into your body which add to the depression, and alcohol definitely does. And I got into smoking cigarettes. I started smoking when I was like 40 years old. I never do anything sort of like the normal way. And at first, I thought it was helping me with my stress because I was really stressed out. I actually had some business deals that totally failed a couple of years, like 5 years ago, and I went actually bankrupt at that moment in time. And so I just kind of was drinking, smoking, all this kind of stuff. I kept, you know, kind of a happy face on when I was doing my videos and interviews and stuff like that. But I was kind of like a mess. And a couple of years ago, I just sort of realized I got to change this. And I've got a family. I got 2 kids. I got 5 dogs. And I'm like, you know, I got to change this at least for them, if anybody. And so I got into doing actually some psychedelic medicines, things like ayahuasca and things like that. Those things helped quite a bit. And then iboga really helped, which is one of the craziest psychedelics out there. And then I actually, the one thing that really got me really changed after that was I began fasting. And actually, I'm fasting as we speak. I'm on day 3 of another fast because I love it so much. And on one of my, I think it was my first fast, because everyone was telling me, there's so much misinformation out there. A lot of people were saying, oh, if you don't eat for like 4 days, you're going to die. It's like, no, that's not true. But, there's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of people are trying to scare you about it and all this kind of stuff. So I didn't know what to expect. So I started a juice fast for the first time, 6 months ago. And on the second day, I was like, this is the best I think I've ever felt in my life. Like, I've got so much energy. My brain's just working like crazy. Like, my body feels great. And I just kept going on it for a while. And within a few days, I think, I just stopped smoking. Like, once you kind of clean out your body and you can let it kind of breathe and let it kind of start to repair itself, those sort of things just sort of happen naturally. And that's sort of what happened to me. And another thing I did was I read a book called The Easy Way to Stop Smoking by Alan Carr. And anyone out there, if you smoke and you want to stop, just read that book. It's amazing. I stopped smoking halfway through it while doing a juice fast. And I never thought about smoking ever again. Like, it's not like a burden. It's not like you hear a lot of smokers, they're like, oh, every day is a tough, getting through it without smoking. It's like, no, I haven't thought about it since the last time I had a cigarette. It hasn't crossed my mind. That's how the book helped, and also getting clean health-wise got. And then it was a few months after that I continued with some more fasts. I continued with more health-related things. Did a lot of meditation, some yoga, things like that. And I heard that Alan Carr had another book, and I didn't even know about it. It was called The Easy Way to Control Alcohol, because I was still drinking, but I wasn't drinking a lot, but I was still drinking. Friends came into town, I'd go out, and we'd drink quite a bit that night or whatever, things like that. And I read that book, and I was like, oh, screw it, I'm done with alcohol, too. And I do still have a couple drinks every now and then, but it's really just one or two. And it's like, I don't want any more than that, because I kind of know how it affects me now, and I know it brings nothing good into my life. One's okay at a party or whatever, but it's really just not a thought. So I gotten that all out of me. And as you pointed out, it's amazing. For people out there, you don't realize that alcohol, in my opinion, is really promoted by the government because it keeps you in that state of depression. It keeps you like kind of cloudy. You can't think too much. Whereas other drugs, or so-called drugs, right? But things like cannabis, when you smoke that, you actually start thinking. And that's why they've always made that kind of illegal. They're like, we don't want people thinking too much. Give them the alcohol, get them into the football games, give them the beer. And what alcohol really does is just kind of dumbs you down. And then the next day you're kind of groggy. You're not thinking too much about having a revolution against the government or anything after that. You're just kind of like, oh, I just feel like crap. So I've done all those things, and now I'm like, I've never felt so good in my life. And I'm right now I'm on day 3 of a fast. I've got all these herbs here, actually, by Dr. Morse. I've got literally like 20 bottles of things in front of me. They're all herbs. That's the only thing I'm taking right now. Things like licorice root and all kinds of stuff. But part of the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I want people to know, because when this collapse happens, a lot of the people are going to panic, are going to be people on like these EBT cards and on food stamps and stuff like that. I want them to know, and most of them are kind of fat. I want them to know that it's really good to not eat for a week or two. Like, it will be the best time of your life. Like, you'll be like, oh my God, I feel so much better now. This fasting thing has been really, they don't want people to know about it, because it actually, from what I can tell, and I've looked into this a lot, it cures virtually every illness that humans have is just fasting alone. And that's why animals, when they are sick, they go into the woods, they don't eat for a couple days, because your body is actually designed to heal itself. And they don't want you to know that. They want you to think it's all those pharmaceuticals. So whenever you're sick, you go into the guy with the white lab coat. He goes, oh, yeah, I can fix the symptoms of the problem, never the actual problem. Those fixing the symptoms actually causes more problems. 10 years later, you're on about 50 bottles of pharmaceuticals, paying thousands of dollars a month, and you're sicker than you've ever been and probably going to die soon, when all you really need to do was just stop eating for a few days, and it probably would have fixed your problem. So part of the thing that I just want to get across to people is look into things like fasting. It is amazing, and we really don't need the food that most people in Western or American culture eat. You literally need 1/10 of what most people eat, and if you changed what you ate, it actually does change, just like stopping with the alcohol like you did. When you change eating things like a lot of greasy stuff, a lot of meat, because when those animals are killed, and that sucks just to start with, that we're killing animals when you think about it. Like, how crazy has this world gotten that people are just like, oh, it's fine to kill everything and eat it. But when you do kill them, they have a massive rush of adrenaline and stuff like that because they're scared, the poor animals, and that actually goes in. This is more hippie talk a little bit, but that energy goes into the food, and when you eat that energy goes into you. So as you change those things, and as I do more fasting, I become more vegan sort of diet. Although not completely, I still do eat some meat, but I try to make it organic. I try to make it mostly fish if I can. But yeah, just doing all those things could be amazing. So this is sort of getting to the point that I was saying earlier where in many ways, for many people, this collapse could be the best thing that ever happened to them because so many people out there are so stressed out. They're working 2 jobs to pay for all their taxes. They're not happy at all. They hate both their jobs, but they're doing it because, well, I don't know, maybe in 40 years I'll get my pension check. They're fat. They're out of shape. They're sick. One of the best things that could potentially happen to them is everything falls apart. They lose all their jobs and they just basically go into the forest for a while, don't eat much, drink some clean water, and think about life. And all of a sudden, I don't want to say it almost sounds like I want people to have this horrible collapse happen to them, but in many, many ways, this could be a very positive thing for many people, but we have to get this information out to them so they realize that and not panic and just start going crazy when it all happens. There was one cruise ship recently that ran out of food for one day, less than 24 hours. And at the end of the day, apparently, people were fighting, physically fighting each other. It's like, guys, one day without food is not a problem, and it's also really good for you. So people just don't know that, and so they go a little bit crazy, right? So if we have this collapse and the grocery stores are empty, if everyone knows, oh, it'll be fine. I don't need to eat for literally months. You can go months without eating if you want to, but if it's just a week or something without food, this would be a really good, healthy sort of thing for me. So it's all about getting that information out there.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back into what you were saying earlier, that you have to be the change you want to see in the world, and you can't expect other people to live a healthier life and, give up drinking, stop eating fast food, consider fasting, consider juicing. You can't expect everyone else to do that if you're not doing it yourself. And you're doing that yourself. You're seeing the changes in your own life, all the positive changes. And now it's just a matter of getting that message out to other people so they can tune into it and kind of break free of the system before the system collapses, and break free of kind of the prevailing paradigm that we have set up where you need to buy a lot of stuff, you're going to be taxed to death in many cases. If you don't die, then we're going to put you on a bunch of chemicals that are probably going to leave you in a worse state. And the natural ways of dealing with a lot of life's problems, whether they be emotional, you got the blues, here's a pill. You have trouble sleeping, here's a pill. Your kid doesn't pay attention in school, here's a pill. We have to get away from that. And like you were saying, perhaps having some sort of systemic collapse would be a very healthy thing, because then people would be they'd be able to break free of all of the stuff that's really making our lives much, much worse.
Yeah, absolutely. After I sold my internet company, I went and lived on a boat, and I tried to sail around the world, and I put everything I had on the boat. And I was already kind of pretty minimalist to begin with, so I didn't have a lot of stuff. But when my boat sank, I sank my boat in El Salvador, and a lot of people said, "Oh, that must have been the scariest, most traumatic thing that you went through, a shipwreck, and you thought you were going to die and all this kind of stuff." I was like, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I lost everything. And once I did, when I got to the shore, I still remember the feeling, because every single thing that I owned in the world was gone. I actually managed to put some credit cards and my passport in my pocket, luckily, but with a zipper on it. So I still had that. But I got to the shore, and I was like, do I walk left? Do I walk right? I have nowhere to live. I have nothing. And it was the best feeling I'd ever felt in my life. So in many ways, this can be a good sort of a thing, but only if you have the right mindset for it. So that's kind of why I want to help get this information out there. And you're right. There's no way I could tell people this information if I wasn't doing it myself, and I wouldn't be so passionate about it unless I've actually seen the results myself. And it truly has been amazing. We've been lied to about everything about health, about our diet, about what we should be doing, what we should be putting into our bodies. And the answer is actually so simple. It's really things like fasting, clean eating, very intermittent fasting, for example, which I always do now. So I only eat 6 hours of the day, and your body just has time then to fix itself. Your body actually can self-heal. And but if you're constantly putting food into it, then it's just constantly working on digesting that food. And if that food is quite dense sort of food, which would be things like meat and dairy and cheese and even things like pasta and rice. So quite dense sort of a thing. It's just got to work on that. Whereas if you put in just fruit, or maybe some light vegetables and stuff, that stuff goes through in like no time at all, and then the body can get back to work on fixing itself. So, I just want to get that information out there to as many people as possible. And, it's kind of funny to think about it. When I started the Dollar Vigilante, the tagline was surviving and prospering during and after the dollar collapse. And that's kind of what I'm doing like today, but I never thought I'd be doing it by telling people about fasting, by vegan diets, by meditation, things like Bitcoin, which of course I didn't know about Bitcoin until 2011. So pretty much all the things that I started doing in 2010, I'm doing them today, but I would have never guessed how I was going to do them. So it's been quite an amazing sort of journey, just seeing, how we're getting to this point, because I knew that point was going to happen, and I knew I had to help people to survive and prosper through it. But it's amazing. I would have never guessed that this is how I was going to do it.
Yeah, it's got to be very rewarding, after putting in so much work and kind of seeing things are finally changing. People are starting to wake up. Perhaps not as many people as we would like, but there is some hope. You had brought up Bitcoin, which is for sure one of the brightest kind of areas that I find in our world today, and it's still controversial. It's still relatively unknown. I mean, millions of people use it, but millions, when we're talking about 7 billion, is still a small number of people. And I just had a phone call last night from my sister-in-law, and she works for a company, and apparently someone had paid them in Bitcoin. She's like, I don't know anything about this. What is this stuff? So the world is changing. People are able to buy products and services and pay for them in Bitcoin. That's incredible. Bitcoin
it's been amazing.
Started off at less than a penny, I believe. And I'm not sure what the number is right now, but it's over $4,000 for quite a while. I think at one point it reached over $5,000. This is insane. What's going on with Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin the future? I've heard some people say that, people thought that MySpace was the future and then Facebook came along. Is Bitcoin the MySpace and maybe we're just looking for a Facebook version of a cryptocurrency, or is Bitcoin it? Is this what we should really be focusing on?
Well, the first thing is, if you don't know anything about cryptocurrencies, you have to look into them. This is an absolute, I don't say revolution because we're not revolving, we're not returning anywhere. It's an evolution in money and banking. This changes the game. From the very first time I got my first Bitcoin in 2011 when it was worth about $3, when someone transferred it to me from the U.S., I was in Mexico, and it was there, and I heard the beep on my computer a second later, and it cost almost nothing. I was like, this changes everything. Gives people the control, the power of money back to them, and it's so important. That's what causes most of these problems in the world today is the central banking, and a lot of people don't realize, and they're never taught about that. A lot of people in the U.S. don't even know what the Federal Reserve is. They don't even know it's not federal to begin with, but that's not even the biggest point of it all. The point is that central banking is a tenet of communism. And it destroys economies, and it impoverishes most people, and really makes the super elites richer and richer. It's a big scam, and it's been going on since 1913 in the U.S. And that's why there's so many problems in the U.S. today with things like minimum wage and things like that, because the inflation is getting so much that you can't keep up with it. And the only things that can keep up with it are the asset prices. So the rich who already own all the assets, they get richer, whereas all the other people who are working for $7 an hour or $8 an hour, they all of a sudden could barely afford to live, and that's what we're seeing now. A lot of people, because they've never been taught what economics is or what money is, they go, well, we need the government to raise the minimum wage and force business owners to pay us more. It's like, no, you're doing exactly wrong. Get rid of the central bank. If you were paid in the exact amount of silver that you were paid in the 1970s, you'd be making, I don't even know, like $300 an hour. So it's like way more. It's because the U.S. dollar is constantly devaluing in price, and people don't realize that. So that's why Bitcoin is so important, because it is one of the only ways, really, and all cryptocurrencies, but the only ways to really get outside of the central banking system. Of course, we have gold and silver, but that's really hard, and especially in this digital age, if I want to buy something from someone in China, to send them some gold, forget about it. It's just, customs and a lot of the shipping companies won't even ship it. Of course, there's digital ways to kind of transfer the ownership of it, and that's good, and gold and silver is good for that. But to have something completely digital, which is like gold, and it is limited in supply, that's the important part, because you can't have that massive amount of inflation then, and then that helps the most amount of people possible. You even had Barack Obama say last year that Bitcoin is like having a Swiss bank account in your pocket, and that's why they want to shut it down any way they can. First of all, they can't shut it down. That's another beautiful thing about Bitcoin. It doesn't really exist anywhere. This is almost like a gift from God, this currency, in my opinion. And it's actually far, far better than a Swiss bank account, because you don't have to trust any Swiss banks with it. You are your own bank, and you can actually store $1 million in Bitcoin in your own brain just by memorizing your passphrase. So this changes the game. Then Barack Obama actually said in his talk about the Swiss bank account, he said, well, how are we going to do things like tax enforcement? And it's like, yeah, how are you going to do that when you don't know where anything is? It's like, oh, that's too bad. I guess you won't be able to do that anymore. And so, it's a beautiful thing. Is Bitcoin the end game? I have no idea. This is the first major cryptocurrency. It's still by far the largest. It's still got the largest base. It's got the largest mining power, which is very important, because if you want it to be not controllable by anyone, you need to have a massive amount of decentralized mining power. And so Bitcoin in many ways is still far, far, far ahead of any other crypto. But, there's a lot of other cryptos, and that's why we're hearing about them all the time. Things like Ethereum and Dash and others that are doing quite well, because they offer some benefits over Bitcoin that Bitcoin doesn't offer. So it is a competitive market, and things will happen and will change. But for people out there, if you haven't looked into it at all, you just have to start looking into it. This is like being at the start of the internet. If you could imagine being able to buy Amazon stock in 1996 or something like that, that's similar to Bitcoin today.
Right, and one of the cryptocurrencies that you've kind of been, you've been given them a fair amount of publicity is Steem, and the website Steemit, which is almost like a blog or a publishing platform, but it's connected to a cryptocurrency. And the more you share, the more you comment, the more other people share and like your stuff, the more your Steem power goes up, and you can take Steem and you can buy stuff with it, or you can go through a few other channels and you can in time transfer it back into dollars. What is can you explain Steem and Steemit, the website?
Sure. Yeah, so I found out about Steemit.com about a little over a year ago, and I was kind of skeptical at the beginning, but as I saw how it worked, I've become a big fan of it. So for the layman out there, with Bitcoin, Bitcoins are created by miners, so you have to spend a lot of money to get equipment and spend on power to create a Bitcoin. That's why it's so valuable, because it actually takes work. It's sort of based on the same method as gold. If you want to get new gold in the world, you have to have a lot of money, a lot of capital, spend a lot of people, hire a lot of people to get a gold mine going. It's very similar with Bitcoin. The only difference between Bitcoin and Steem, well, there's lots of differences, but the main difference is that with Steem, when the miners create the new currency, so it's always inflating, actually a lot more in Bitcoin, so it's not really going to be a good currency because it's inflating too much, but it is something that is of value at this moment in time, and it could be of value in the future. But as the miner creates the Steem, most of the value actually goes to whoever creates the best content on Steemit.com or other places that you can actually earn Steem. So it's really interesting. Instead of the miner getting all the profit, the miner gets some profit, enough to pay for its costs and get a small profit, but the rest goes to whoever creates the best content. So it's actually self-creating a place where people are incentivized to create the best content possible. And for me personally, I've made, I think, well over $100,000 in the last year posting on Steemit. I'm one of the top people on Steemit, though, I should let people know, because of my following with cryptocurrencies and things like that. But I know a lot of people who have a much less following than myself, who have made tens of thousands of dollars just posting on there. So if you're out there and you're looking for ways to make a little money, and you're good at, say, writing or creating content, you have to check out Steemit.com. Now, I don't know how long this may last. It could die in the next couple of years, or it could do really well. The reasons that it could do well is it actually could be a competitor to things like Facebook and Twitter and things like that, but completely decentralized. And we're seeing all the problems today happening because of things like YouTube and Facebook censoring so much content that it's become insane and demonetizing so many people. If everyone switches over to something like Steemit could have a valuation of something like Facebook, and Steemit's Steem currency's current valuation, I don't know off the top of my head, I'm going to guess it's around $200 million. I think Facebook is something like I'm just guessing, hundreds of billions of dollars. So if Steam actually becomes a competitor to Facebook, you will see the value of that Steam currency rise. If it doesn't, it could go to zero. It's sort of like a new technology. It's sort of like a new venture. But for anyone out there who's just interested, and that's actually a good way to get your first cryptocurrency as well. So if you're brand new to cryptocurrency, just get on Steam. You don't even have to post content. You can actually earn some Steam just by posting good comments, by upvoting certain things at the right time. It's a really interesting ecosystem, and it's something that we're going to see more and more of this cryptocurrency sort of blockchain sort of a evolution that's going on. Can touch all facets of life. That we're seeing, that's why Ethereum, that's smart contracts, that can get rid of the legal system. We're seeing Bitcoin, that's a currency that can get rid of the central banks. We're seeing Steam, that's a social media-backed blockchain, which could get rid of things like Facebook and Twitter. This is like, for people who aren't paying attention and think this is just Beanie Babies, like Peter Schiff likes to say. No, this is an absolute evolution, and it's like being at the start of the internet, which I was around for, actually, and it's so interesting for me to see it happening again.
Definitely. We're living in a very exciting time, and even with all the different chaos we have going on around us, we have a lot to look at and say, well, entrepreneurship, innovation, technology it's just speeding up at an exponential pace. Who knows where we'll be in 5 or 10 years? And a lot of that is thanks because we do have small parts of the world that are very free, and people are allowed to invent and just break free from the government and everything that we've been taught that we have to believe in all of this nonsense. So any final words that you want to leave the listeners with, Jeff?
No, I would just mention if you're interested in cryptocurrencies, go to dollarvigilante.com/bank. I actually give away $50 of Bitcoin to people if you accept our offer on that page. And it's a 4-video webinar or tutorial on cryptocurrencies. So if you want to learn about it and possibly get $50 in Bitcoin at the end of it, go to dollarvigilante.com/bank. And that's basically it. I'm at cryptocurrency conferences across the world in the next few weeks. I'm at the Nexus conference in Colorado. Then I'm the next day in London. I'm at the Dash conference. And the next day after that, I'm at the Blockchain Summit in London. I also have our own conference here in Acapulco, Mexico every February called Anarchapulco, which is the largest voluntarist/anarchist conference in the world. And we also have the Dollar Vigilante Summit along with it at that time in February as well. So keeping busy out here, just trying to spread the truth and trying to wake people up and trying to help people through this collapse, which is going to happen, and hopefully to a great, much freer, much better world afterwards.
Absolutely, I agree, and I'm happy to be along for the ride with you. Might try to make it down into Acapulco, Mexico in February. We'll see. We'll see how many miles I have on the flights. So thank you to Jeff Berwick. Also, thanks to everyone else who has made Guest Week a fantastic week. Thank you to Scott Horton. Thank you to Ian Freeman, Daryl Perry, Thomas DiLorenzo. All of you guys have been a blast to talk with. And I'll leave it at that. Everyone have a great weekend. I always like to encourage people to drink too much, but please drive safe. We will see you on Monday when we go back to our normal day-to-day schedule of shows. We'll see you then. Have a great weekend. Good night.
In an economic climate where dollar collapse, skyrocketing inflation, and total loss of financial privacy is almost guaranteed, many wonder how to keep their finances safe. In the past, investors have turned to offshore banks to try to regain control. But privacy in offshore banking is dead. Besides, offshore accounts cost a fortune, aren't convenient, and regulations make opening one nearly impossible for anyone other than the ultra-rich. But a brand new technology has made it easy for individuals like you to escape the trap of central banking without going offshore. It's not offshore banking, it's nationless private banking. And right now, you can discover the nationless private banking system for free. Plus, discover how to qualify for a $50 deposit to your new private bank. Click on the link for more information now.